In order to investigate whether or not entertainment and media is woke, I need to finish the Disney Star Wars trilogy. I watched two of these movies and I never watched the third one, Rise of Skywalker. And it's been so long since I watched The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi that I have to start at the beginning and watch all three movies in order to analyze whether or not these films are actually woke in the way that people talk about them, in particular because this is the franchise that I think started this whole trend, or at least as near as I can figure out. I am going to look at this as judiciously as possible. I'm going to take the concept of woke to mean that it is a money-grabbing attempt by a studio bankrupt of ideas to try to garner a new audience by shoving in representation and diversity as a way to get new people into theater seats as opposed to telling a good story. And watching The Force Awakens, I can't say that it meets that definition. Let's look at the overall plot. On a rewatch, the plot of this entire trilogy is delivered in the opening credit sequence of The Force Awakens, in addition to a piece of dialogue delivered by Supreme Leader Snoke. Basically, the opening credits tell us that Luke Skywalker has disappeared and everybody is looking for him. That is the plot line of The Force Awakens. And then later, about midway through the movie, maybe a little bit before midway, Supreme Leader Snoke says, "If Skywalker returns, the new Jedi will rise." And I interpreted this as a kind of prophecy. I'm not sure where it originated from, but some kind of a vision that some Jedi had that Skywalker will rise. And since the third movie is titled The Rise of Skywalker, I think we can all agree where this is going. It's not referring to Luke, who, spoiler alert, dies in the second movie. It's referring to a new Skywalker yet to be revealed. And I think we're supposed to know this from the first movie, even not knowing what happens to Luke in the second movie. A whole bunch of candidates for who this new Skywalker might be are introduced in The Force Awakens. That's basically the plot of the movie. So when you're watching this film, the audience is supposed to be thinking, who is it? Who could be the new Skywalker or the new Jedi for whom The Force awakens? And although it's pretty obvious that it's going to be Rey based on her skill set and the way that she is introduced in the story, there are some other interesting candidates that we are exposed to. First, there's Luke himself, who is introduced in the beginning of the film via the scrolling text that he is missing, not dead, and that everyone is looking for him. So there is an expectation that Luke will be found and that the rise of Skywalker could involve him directly. There's also Leia, who is also introduced about midway through this movie. She is Luke's sister, so technically a Skywalker, even though she goes by the Organa name. And, we never really got to see Leia use her full potential in the original movie, so she's a candidate for creating this new order of Jedi as well. Then we're introduced to Kylo Ren, who we learn in this film is actually the son of Leia and Luke, which means that he is also kind of a Skywalker since he is Leia's son. And although he is introduced as a villain and an antagonist, there is this question brought up in the first movie that maybe he is just someone who has lost his way, turned to the dark, but could be turned again to the light in the same way that Anakin Skywalker was. So there's another candidate. And then we're introduced to Finn, who, although not a likely candidate to be a Skywalker, is shown to wield the lightsaber a couple of times in this film, so you can't fully count him out. Also, I think his backstory as a previous stormtrooper is interesting. Actually really interested in that character and wish they had done more with him in both the first film and the second one. But finally, we have Rey, who has this mysterious parentage and a lot of interesting skills, and pretty quickly she becomes the preferred or most likely candidate to be a Jedi or to have Jedi powers, although her allegiance or connection to the Skywalker family is really unclear, and to my knowledge isn't actually resolved until the third movie, which again, I have not seen. So the point of The Force Awakens is to reveal that one of these people that we are introduced to is going to create a new order of Jedi Knights. And those Jedi Knights presumably will be responsible for wiping out or submerging this new threat of the First Order and the dark side of the Force, which has emerged at some murky time in the past to become a political and really visceral threat to the world as we know it in the current time period. So, how well does this film do in introducing these characters and explaining this conflict? I would say pretty well. I think it carries off interesting introductions to all of these characters in the first 15 or 20 minutes. There were a lot of interesting action scenes where the characters interact and we get to know them as individuals and how they play off of each other. The motivations of the individual characters seem more or less authentic and believable. The characters have flaws as well as skills, and we do get to see them undergo some evolution throughout the course of even just this first movie. So we are introduced immediately to Poe, who I think is an interesting character. He is a star pilot. He's part of the Resistance. He's somebody that General Leia trusts, and she has sent him on a mission to Jakku to try to find this missing piece of information that will help them find out where Skywalker went. We are also introduced to Kylo Ren, played by Adam Driver, who at this time is masked, but we know that he is a Jedi who has turned to the dark side because we are given information that he did not rise from the dark. Later in the movie, we learn that he's actually the son of Han Solo and Leia, but at this time, we just know he's kind of this ominous figure who has these Jedi powers and a lot of emotional rage. We also are introduced to Finn, who is a stormtrooper who is defecting from the, First Order as opposed to Empire. Then we are introduced to Rey, who is a scavenger on the planet Jakku, eking out a living, and we are slowly dripped information about why she is remaining on this planet, that something traumatic happened to her there, that she lost her family or was abandoned and is waiting for them to return. Kylo Ren in particular, I think, is an interesting antagonist character in no small part because Adam Driver does such a wonderful job portraying him. But this concept of a young, disaffected man who has been born into privilege and had everything, but it wasn't enough, whose emotional immaturity or maybe past trauma and pain, it's not really clear what is driving Kylo Ren to the dark side, but whatever it is formidable enough to choose the dark over his own family, even when Han Solo reaches out to make amends and makes the choice to kill his father in order to cement his allegiance to the dark side of the Force. This is a pretty moving scene, although, again, I would say it would have been more moving if we had more understanding of what led to the rift between Kylo Ren or Ben Solo and his parents and what it was that happened exactly to bring him to this point. Now, I know we get a little bit of that in The Last Jedi, but I'm talking even further back. Like, why did he go to train with Luke in the first place? Why did they wait so long to train him? And maybe some of that is answered in the third movie, which, again, I have not seen. But in just watching this first movie, some interesting questions are piqued. Not all of them are answered, and that makes for an interesting character. So overall, I think this movie does a good job at setting up the conflict of the current times, does a good job setting up the characters and how they play off of each other, gives you some good indications of what their motivations are, while not giving you all of the information so that you're still kind of guessing a little bit at the mystery and how these relationships are going to resolve into some kind of a story. So, overall, The Force Awakens is pretty enjoyable. And I would say that the movie is pretty well scripted too. The scenes play together really well. It's not confusing why things happen. The characters make good choices for the most part, with a couple of exceptions that I will get into under criticisms. And the overall flow of the story makes sense. You have them introduced on Jakku with Rey doing her scavenging while Poe and Finn make an alliance on the Starkiller base to escape together and rejoin the Resistance. Something happens to Poe, which we find out later he was separated while Finn thinks he was dead. And then, Finn and Rey meet. And when Finn and Rey meet, they get together with BB-8. They decide to join the Resistance. They escape Jakku on the Millennium Falcon. They run into Han Solo, who is organically already looking for his ship. They end up going to this green planet to meet with this insider knowledge person, Maz, who is going to help them locate the the Resistance because Han Solo is apparently not in communication with anyone anymore. They do get some information from this person. Rey has some visions which are intriguing about who she is, what her powers are. There is a fight scene when the First Order comes to try to capture them, while the Resistance is also on its way. Rey encounters Kylo Ren. They have a confrontation where he realizes that she is strong in the Force, and also that she has knowledge about the map to Luke Skywalker, so he takes her back to the Starkiller base and interrogates her. He convinces the Supreme Leader Snoke to help him with the interrogation, but she manages to free herself from captivity using her newly awakened Force powers and starts to try to escape the base. Meanwhile, Poe and Finn are reunited. They meet with Leia, who tells them about the larger issues with this Starkiller base being able to destroy all of the Republic's remaining planets. This part's a little bit confusing. They determine that there's some kind of oscillator that they can disable on the Starkiller base, and if they blow that up, then they'll be able to beat the First Order's giant weapon, I guess. It's a little bit repetitive from previous Star Wars movies, but that's okay, we'll run with it. So they go to the Starkiller base, and where Finn immediately tells Poe that he lied. This isn't the first time he has lied, so in character for him. He lied about his role with among the stormtroopers, that he was actually a sanitation worker. He doesn't know how to disable the oscillator, but it's okay because they managed to take captive the Captain Phasma character, and they use her to accomplish the mission. And then Finn wants to rescue Rey, but since she's rescued herself, that becomes unnecessary. Instead, that whole scene culminates in Han Solo trying to connect with his son, Kylo Ren, and convince him to come home. Instead, Kylo Ren decides to kill his father in order to cement his allegiance to the dark side of the Force. Again, his motivations for this are a little murky, but the scene is emotionally evocative, so I'll give it a thumbs up for that. They escape the base somehow. There's a really cool fight scene in the snow between Rey and Kylo Ren, as well as Finn a little bit, although he gets knocked out. Chewie, meanwhile, fixes the ship so they can escape that situation, and while all of that is going on, Poe is up in space with all of General Leia's fighters taking out the Starkiller, which they successfully do. So there's a happy ending, sort of, at the end of this movie. I say sort of because Han Solo is dead, and Leia was wrong about the ability to turn her son back to the light. So she's made mistake after mistake and essentially lost everyone that she loves by the end of this movie, which is heartbreaking and, if anything, a little understated for how traumatizing that ought to be for her as a character. But it's okay because R2-D2 is reawoken and has the map to Luke Skywalker, so the movie ends with Rey taking Luke's lightsaber to go try to get him to resume his training of a new order of Jedi Knights. And that will lead us into the second movie with the ominous title, The Last Jedi. So overall, a pretty competent plot. I was able to articulate it just right on camera. I mean, I wrote it down, but I didn't have to read the notes and kind of fuddle my way through understanding what it was that happened. It's more or less clear. There's also a lot of really good things that are happening in this movie that make it, I think, an enjoyable watch. The cinematography is really cool. They have some really neat filming locations and backdrops to use against the particularly emotional moments of the film, like Han Solo versus Kylo Ren and Rey's fight with Kylo Ren in the snow. Those were both really, really well-directed scenes, at least in my amateurish opinion. The character motivations make sense, like I mentioned before. Costumes are great, the music is great, the backstory of the characters leads to a lot of interest in watching the next film, so you can kind of dig into why all of these things happened. You're kept interested scene to scene. It's not dragging or really boring in any particular place, and just, overall a pretty decent movie. And I think that's an ode to the hero's journey being a effective storytelling technique. And I'm not the first person to bring this up. George Lucas references the hero's journey in the original Star Wars, and there are many comparisons have been made between The Force Awakens and Star Wars A New Hope, both encapsulating this idea of a person who doesn't think that they are worthy going on a journey to eventually become a hero. That model works really well for kind of that mythological folk story sort of epic story, and I think that audiences respond really well to it. I have heard Rey described as a Mary Sue type character, that she's just got too many skills and is a little bit overly likable by every other character in the movie to be believable. I happen to like Rey's character, and I don't think that she fits the definition of a Mary Sue, which was originally a fan fiction term, which I'll have to cover in a completely different video. But Rey is the protagonist, and yeah, she has a lot of advantages and a lot of skills that make her stand out as a character. That's not quite the same as writing a self-insertion character into someone else's universe. So I'm going to give Rey a pass, although I do think that her mechanical skills are a little bit overplayed and a little bit unearned in places, even in just this first movie. Like, we just don't really understand why she's able to do all the things that she can do, including fixing the Millennium Falcon when Han Solo himself seems a little bit stumped as to how to do that. There are also a number of other plot conveniences in this movie, but they're not out of the realm of possibility for this kind of a cinematic experience. Like, I don't think that movie authors of this particular genre are really all that concerned with realism when it comes to how the plot progresses. I think they're much more concerned with entertaining the audience, and it does manage to do that, and it does it in a way that's at least logically consistent enough that it doesn't take you out of the story. So you can suspend your disbelief for some of the conveniences that are thrown into the story, like the Millennium Falcon is just sitting there, and Rey and Finn can manage to pilot it off the planet with ease, despite the fact that neither one of them knows how to fly. Okay, sure. And speaking of the Millennium Falcon, I will say that there are one too many homages to the original Star Wars franchise in this movie to suit my personal taste. I get a little tired of Star Wars always hankering back to what made the original movies popular and just kind of rehashing the same ideas over and over. Now, that's not to say The Force Awakens does not have new ideas, and I think the new ideas it has are actually pretty good. But they do make a lot of homage-style fan service. Like, was it really necessary to include so many scenes with General Leia and Han Solo and later Luke Skywalker? I like them being referenced in these movies and even cameos, but they're like major characters. And I kind of wonder, was that necessary to tell this story? Or would it have been just as effective, if not more effective, for those characters to take more of a backseat and for us just to learn that Kylo Ren is Han Solo's son and that Rey is whoever she is, and that those characters are getting to know each other and developing their own story? That might have actually worked better for me. I don't know if I was really as jazzed about seeing these old actors as perhaps the show writers thought that I would be. And maybe other people were, but I'll cover in my review of The Last Jedi why I think this may have been a mistake. There's also a lot of things in this movie that are physically impossible, or at least implausible. And this is common for these types of movies, so I'm not going to let it drag down the review, but one of the more egregious is when they take the Millennium Falcon through light speed to break through the shield and then stop on the planet's surface. That should definitely have killed everyone on board. I don't know why they thought that would be successful. There are also a number of military tactics in this movie that I don't think would actually work if this was a serious story about war. It is, however, not a serious story about war. The politics and who's versus who is really murky. I know that there is a republic, which is apparently, sequestered on a bunch of planets that can be blown up from one location and in no other way controls the universe that we're speaking of. And I know that there is apparently some kind of military that is owned by that republic. And then there's also the resistance, whose relationship with the republic and the generalized military is really unclear. And then you have the First Order, which I think are terrorists operating out of their own space in order to try to bring the republic down. But it's just, it's not super clear what all the political alliances are or how the powers are balanced within a political sense in this world. But then again, it's also not why people watch movies like this. I don't think Disney was trying to create an adult story informing people about how governments change hands. So I'm going to give it a pass. It was clear enough that there were good guys and bad guys. the resistance is underfunded for whatever reason, and the terrorists seem to have like ridiculously huge funding, which is surprising. But beyond that, it was, followable. I was able to make sense of it. And then in one of my last criticisms, I will say the one big mistake that the protagonists make in this movie is when they land on the green planet and they're going to find Maz's temple. And for whatever reason, Han Solo, who is super famous, goes with them undisguised, and they bring BB-8, who did not need to be there and is the droid that everyone is looking for. The second they walk into this hideout, they are immediately spotted by spies of both the First Order and the Resistance, and that results in all the calamity that befalls them later. That was a stupid decision, and stupid in part because they knew they were on the run. They knew they were being chased, and they took no precautions in exposing themselves in this very, at least semi-public location where they didn't know anyone and didn't know if they could trust everyone who was there. It's kind of one of those plotting for convenience things where I understand why the writers did it, but it just made me go, these characters. And there's more of that in The Last Jedi, and it's actually worse. So we'll cover that in the next movie. I was able to give it a pass in this movie for happening once, and because the characters are a mix of naive young people, Finn and Rey both being relatively inexperienced, and Han Solo, who, although not inexperienced, is somewhat impulsive and maybe takes risks that he shouldn't without really thinking about it. And then the droid is, a droid. So maybe these people were just not expected to be strategic in this particular situation, but it was a little bit disappointing to watch them do that. All right, so is this movie good? Overall, I would say yes. Yes, The Force Awakens is a perfectly watchable movie. It's particularly good as a kids movie or a family film, which is where I think all of the Star Wars movies sit and are seen to sit by the general public. If you disagree with that, you may be suffering from a problem with nostalgia. I'll be honest, I like the original Star Wars movies, but I don't watch them anymore. I tried to watch them once a couple of years ago, and I was just not as interested in the story as I was when I was a younger person. I think part of that has to do with how many times I've seen the movies. They're just not surprising anymore. Part of it has to do with the fact that they're older movies and some of the, seams are showing compared to modern day technology and what we can do with movies in a cinematic experience now. And part of it is that the movies are just, and they're definitely not bad movies. They're good movies, but they're not intended for a deep thinking adult audience. They're fun adventures in space with a little bit more depth in some of the plot twists and morality concepts that are introduced, which is why I think that they endure or have endured over time. But, they're still they're family movies. They're primarily intended to entertain kids, and I think that a lot of fans today who are watching the new installments of this franchise are having expectations for these films that really can't be met. I'm not saying that the Disney Trilogy movies are perfect. I'm going to dig into why I really dislike The Last Jedi in a future video. But I think there are people who watch the newer installments of these movies today who unfairly compare them with the experience they had watching the originals when they were younger. I think if you were to watch the original Star Wars movies in your late 30s or 40s, you might still like them, but you probably wouldn't have that same sense of miraculous wonder and absorption as you would watching them as a kid. And on top of that, when the original Star Wars A New Hope came out in the late 1970s, it was the only movie of its kind at the time. So people really, really loved it because there wasn't anything else like that. That is not the case today. There are so many movies to choose from that have a fantastical element, whether you call them science fiction, which I don't, or space fantasies, which I think is more accurate for the Star Wars franchise. There's just a lot more to choose from when it comes to that genre. So I think people today are more discerning, their palate has improved, they have higher expectations, and it's possible that no matter what had been done with the Disney trilogy, there are people that just would not have liked it. So you have to keep that into account. Again, I'm not saying the Disney trilogy movies get a pass, that they're perfect. They're not. but I don't think that they are quite as bad as some people make out. And I especially do not think it's because they feature women in heroic roles or people of color in heroic roles. If you are still of that opinion, we just have different values, and we are not going to agree about what makes any piece of media good or bad. I just don't think about it that way. Again, there are problems with the plot lines of some of these films, and I will point them out for The Last Jedi, but overall, it's not a woke problem. That's not the issue. Is The Last Jedi worse? Is it really the beginning of this shift in media and entertainment that started to focus on social justice, warrior identity politics at the expense of writing good stories? You'll have to wait and see, because I'm going to cover that movie in a separate video after I have rewatched it. If you like this review, please let me know in the comments. Again, I am still relatively new at this. I'm trying different things on different weeks to see how rapidly I can produce videos, as well as the quality of content in these videos. So again, if you like this content, please let me know. Please like and subscribe, as I am currently growing my channel, and until next time.